All right, we're going to call our meeting to order, and let's start with our Pledge of Allegiance, if you please. Everyone stand. Hand over your heart. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And if we may have the roll call, please. Ms. Rodriguez.
Councilmember Engler.
Councilman Engler here.
Councilmember Jones.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Bill De La Pena.
Present.
Mayor Adam.
And I'm here. Thank you. Well, as you can see, we don't have our masks on, and that's because there's just three of us up here at the dais, our city manager, our city attorney, and my fellow council members are video conferencing in. And we're going to start with our usual COVID-19 update with Mr. Powers.
Thank you so much, Mayor Adam. Just a few brief comments tonight in my COVID update. Today, just 26 new cases were reported out of 710 additional tests that were conducted. 27 folks in the hospital, and of those, 8 of them are in the intensive care unit. We have had 165 deaths as a result of COVID-19 in Ventura County since the beginning. The county remains in the red tier, which is the substantial spread tier. And our metrics are such that we are qualifying to move into the orange tier in one of those metrics, which is our positivity rate, which is actually quite good at 2.9. But we are not meeting that in the adjusted case rate, which still remains at 4.9 in today's latest numbers. And so that keeps us in the substantial tier. As a reminder, those numbers are recalculated every Tuesday on a rolling basis. Our focus here in the city remains on business support and trying to work within the confines of the state system and have businesses be able to get back up and running as quickly and as efficiently as possible when they have the ability to do so based on those guidelines. Wanted to remind everyone that the City of Thousand Oaks Rental Assistance Program is now open and live, started yesterday. We already have over 50 applications in. For those that are interested, it's toaks.org/rent, toaks.org/rent, and you can find out more information about how to qualify and apply through that site. So just wanted to make sure that those that are experiencing financial difficulty as a result of COVID in relation to rent, that is a program that we would encourage you to take a look at. As I wrap my comments tonight, I just wanted to take a quick moment to acknowledge a leadership transition in our community development department. And late last month, we announced that Mr. Kelvin Parker would be succeeding Mr. Mark Town as our next community development director. And as I look to my right, those gentlemen are already placed on the dais as they have a couple of items this evening. I used to joke, we had Mark was part of what was called the 60 Plus Club. Jay Spurgeon, Barry McComb, and Mark Town, our theater director, our public works director, and community development director. He's the last of the 60 Plus Club to enter retirement. But anyone that knows Mark knows what enormous shoes those are to fill. And what's really become a hallmark of our organization, Mark gave me an opportunity to have a long runway here, and this long runway gave us the ability to plan for the future. And so we have Kelvin actually assuming the duties of community development director now. in a unique time when you're leading in a virtual environment. It's a chance for us to allow Kelvin to start that process with Mark still here, and that is just a tremendous benefit to the organization. Just an amazing thing to be able to plan strategically for these types of leadership shifts and have them occur so organically. So my hat's off and appreciation to Mark for giving us the ability to do that. We'll have plenty of time to laud Mark as he'll be with us in a role of community development advisor as we head through the remainder of his tenure at the end of the calendar year. He'll be working especially on the transition of a new council member, at least one into our 5-member city council, to bring them up to speed on land use issues and the general plan. He'll also be working with the existing council in preparation for all the decisions they have before them as it relates to the general plan and land use alternatives. So very fortunate to be able to have his expertise to help us do that during this transition period. So just wanted to make sure I acknowledged both of them.
Great. Thank you, Drew. I just want to say a few words about Kelvin. It really gives me great pleasure to introduce him as your new Community Development Director. Kelvin was hired as the city's Deputy Community Development Director about 2.5 years ago, at which time he brought over 20 years of planning experience to the city, including experience with the cities of Westminster, Pasadena, and Santa Clarita. Prior to that, Kelvin earned his undergraduate degree at the University of California, Irvine, and later earned a Master of Public Administration degree from California State University at Fullerton. As Deputy Director, Kelvin has been responsible for all aspects of development planning, building and safety, counter operations, and code compliance, and has also been involved in the general plan update and e-permitting process that we are actively engaged in. He's also been the department's liaison to our Planning Commission, where he's been involved in a variety of cases, including residential, commercial, and biotech. Kelvin and I have worked closely the last 2.5 years, and I know that he has the knowledge, skills, and experience necessary to lead the department in the years ahead. I am also confident that Kelvin and the whole Community Development Department team will continue to carry on the city's long-standing tradition of thoughtful community planning and high-quality design. And with that, I am pleased to turn the mic over to Kelvin for perhaps a few words.
And as Kelvin jumps in, I want to stress to everyone in City Council, Mark's not going anywhere. So for right now, he's going to be with us, and you'll see him here and on the dais, even working through various items, but working very closely with the City Council as well. So we'll have a proper opportunity to give Mark a send-off later this year. Kelvin.
Thank you, both Drew and Mark. You know, I was excited to join the city 2.5 years ago because this is a great place. It has a high quality of life. I consider it a privilege to serve as the Community Development Director here. Community involvement is key to any city. I'm just very happy and excited to continue to work on the projects that Mark mentioned in terms of e-permitting and the general plan. I'm truly looking forward to working for the city and serving the community going forward.
All right, that's very good. Thank you, Mr. Powers. And Kelvin, congratulations. Looking forward to working with you. Your knowledge and professionalism is already quite evident, and you're going to be a great community development director. Congratulations. All right, we have, and Mr. Town, as Mr. Powers said, we're going to have a formal send-off for you later in the year for the wonderful time that you've spent with our city. All right, we have a couple of presentations. One is Arbor Day, which was actually April 24th, but thanks to COVID, we're getting around to it here in close to November. We celebrate it every year, and we preserve a clean and healthy environment, and it's a very important role that the trees play in that environment. For the past 22 years, the City of Thousand Oaks has annually recognized Arbor Day, and this has allowed the city to achieve Tree City status by meeting Arbor Day Foundation standards for sound urban forestry management. In fact, I was just talking to Mr. Town. We've been a tree city now for 25 straight years. That's a great record and shows the commitment to our environment that the city has. We do continue to develop policies and programs that conserve natural resources, that save energy, that reduce air pollution, promote sustainable land use, and encourage clean transportation options and this includes the city's most recent action to reduce the use of single-use plastics. So happy belated Arbor Day to everyone. And we have one other presentation this evening, and this is for the National Arts and Humanities Month, and that is for October. The arts and humanities are a fundamental component of our Thousand Oaks community, and they play a vital role in our local economy, accounting for nearly 9,000 jobs, gives many opportunities to bring people together for shared experiences, and this is the reason the City Council will include an arts and cultural element in the general plan update. As we all know, these last several months have been particularly challenging for our local artists and art organizations, but despite the challenges, they have sought out innovative ways to continue sharing their work and enriching the culture of the Conejo Valley. The city is very proud of our arts community and thankful for all the dedicated workers in arts and humanities. We know things are difficult right now, and our hearts are with you, and we appreciate all your efforts. So thank you for that. And now we're going to go to our public comments. Madam Clerk, would you please announce those?
This is a time and place for public comments. For those wishing to address the City Council regarding items on the agenda or on a subject within the city's jurisdiction. All remarks should be addressed to the council as a whole. Speakers are requested to state their name and community of residence for the record. Under state law, public comment matters may not be considered by the council unless listed on the agenda, but may be referred to the city manager for administrative follow-up. 3 individuals have requested to speak, and pursuant to council standards, speakers are allowed 3 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. And first up, we have Karen Wright, by video, I believe.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. I am Karen Wright, and I'm a proud resident of Thousand Oaks for the last 20 years. And I'm here to tell you about a nonprofit that I founded, the Greater Contribution. We're celebrating our 15th anniversary based in Thousand Oaks. Our mission is dedicated to empowering poor women to work their way out of poverty, and our organization believes that compassion has no boundaries. So how do we do this work? We provide business skills training, we provide literacy training, and we provide peer mentoring to impoverished women in Uganda so they can lift themselves out of poverty. Following the business skills training, we provide microloans, which probably many of you are familiar with, small loans from $50 to $300. And these loans are specifically for starting small businesses, because the goal is not simply to loan money out and get it back, but the goal is to truly help women lift themselves out of poverty. And so this is about a sustainable long-term solution to poverty. In the last 15 years, we have provided over 18,000 microloans, which have benefited over 30,000 people. And we're proud to say that our repayment rate is 98%. But even more than that, even more than the repayment, is that we know we're being successful because we have stats to prove that women are, in fact, working their way out of poverty. And I love getting the stories back from Uganda where a woman says, I'm so thrilled because I can now feed my family more than one meal a day. Or a woman is able to send her children to school for the first time in many years. We have a wonderful story of a woman who was selling small amounts of baked goods, but she wasn't making a living. She joined our program, she saved diligently, and was able to buy a sewing machine because she loved to sew. And so then she repaid that loan. She qualified for a second loan, again, saved diligently, bought fabric, thread, and other materials. Again, third time around, bought sewing lessons for herself. and now has an established business. And so it's wonderful that these women are able to create businesses that lift them out of poverty, but also allow them to do meaningful work that's important to them. And
Thank you,
so
Ms. Wright. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Appreciate you coming down, or appearing by video, I should say. Next up, we have Dave Saltmarsh by phone, I believe. Are you with us, Dave?
Hi, this is Dave Saltmarsh. Can you hear me okay?
We got you, Dave. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to address City Council. My name is Dave Saltmarsh, and I've been a resident in Thousand Oaks for 24 years. As part of my wife's and my retirement plan and financial security, we invested in Thousand Oaks in some single-family rental property. And I think, you know, this kind of investment will take many years to try to get anything out of. And the reason I'm speaking with the council tonight is I would like them to consider vacating or reversing a couple of codes that they have that allows the finance department to get reimbursed for unpaid bills from residents, from landlords. In other words, if a tenant doesn't pay their bill, they come after the landlord. So I would like to say that common sense would demonstrate the city should not attempt to hold us responsible for legal agreements or contracts they have entered into with these independent adult residents. And I said, this type of overreach certainly doesn't extend to our tenants' gas, their electrical bills, their grocery bills, their fuel, their car payments, cable, insurance, etc. It would be illegal. I think it would set kind of a weird and quite an overreach precedent. I think you could probably understand my point with that. I know they passed municipal codes that allows it, but I just don't think it makes it right, because we did not personally use the tenant's wastewater, and we did not drink it, shower, or cook with it, and we were not a party to the agreement that they signed with the city. The finance department asking us to try to pursue money that's owed to them is very, very problematic. We could not get a judgment from a civil or small claims court for money that was owed to the city. So it kind of boxes in the corner where we just cannot recoup this kind of money. And unfortunately, in January of 2019, we learned that the finance department follows through with their threats on this. On our very first tenant that we had in Thousand Oaks, they stopped paying their rent, and unfortunately, they stopped paying their utility bills. So ultimately, it cost us over $10,000. We have not recouped any of that. And on top of that, we got the sting of a $256 bill from the city of Thousand Oaks. And the finance department did say they would follow up with standard billing and collecting, but no finance representative has ever gotten back to us about any reimbursement they have received, and I feel like, why should they? They lost their motivation once we paid their bill. We understand the cities need to appropriately and ethically generate funds and collect funds, but this is just wrong. And I doubt this is a big revenue collector for the city. But it does carry with it the ability to significantly impact business people like us that are trying to reach our financial obligations.
Thank you, Mr.
I think the
Saltmarsh.
downside.
Thank you,
Yes.
sir. Appreciate
Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, and up next is Gus Gress. You there, Gus?
Yes, hello. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi there. So my name is Gus Gress, and I'm a student at Newbury Park High School. I live here in Thousand Oaks, and I am also the community liaison student officer for the local organization Miller Youth in Government, which is through the YMCA. And I'm here just to represent that group and talk a little bit about what we've been doing with respect to youth engagement in our community and politics and government during this coronavirus time period. So recently, the Miller Youth in Government delegation, along with our other sister YMCAs locally, the Conejo YMCA and Yarra YMCA, we had our first virtual Youth in Government conference of the year where we discussed proposals, presented proposals, and debated them on local county level issues. Things were discussed from smoking to environmental justice to sex education, all types of issues that are on the minds of students here in Ventura County. And for your information, the proposal that won was that we should have a community garden, so that could be something to consider. Also, in recent times, we had a candidate forum in which we heard from both Assemblymember Jackie Irwin and her opponent in the State Assembly District 44 race, Denise Pedro. They met with us at our weekly Zoom meeting, and we got to, we asked them, we had some questions that were asked from our youth delegates, and we also got to hear them talk about themselves as candidates and why they're running and what for. And so essentially the Youth in Government delegation, the Miller Youth in Government delegation, we are a group of about 50 students this year that are meeting online every week to discuss politics and enhance their knowledge of politics and government at the local, state, and national level, which is obviously something that's very, very important during a worldwide pandemic and a general election, which only comes once every high school term, and this is that year. So if y'all are ever in the need of or interested in youth voices with respect to local politics and what's going on in the world, and would like our insight or would like us to volunteer for an event, please reach out to Miller Youth in Government, and you can find us online or on social media. Thank you very much.
Very good. Nice job, Gus. Youth in Government's a great program. Highly recommended. Mr. Powers?
Thank you, Mayor Adam. I appreciate it and appreciate the speakers this evening. Just wanted to follow up on one of those items. Certainly sympathize with the resident that's having some difficulty with his tenants as it relates to rent. Our finance team has been in correspondence with him on a number of occasions. Just for the broader public, it's common practice for municipalities to collect back payment for utilities like water and wastewater, which live with the property. Those are benefits to the property itself, and as the property owner, that responsibility falls back to them, as is the council's policy. And the reason for that is it's not a revenue question. This is a question on subsidy by other ratepayers. So essentially what happens if you write off those types of things, you're asking the other ratepayers to subsidize those issues. So that's oftentimes why we'll see landlords roll the water and wastewater into the rent or deal with different types of security deposits and things like that to try to shield themselves from such things. It's certainly very unfortunate and do sympathize with them. That is the policy, and the reason for the policy is all about other ratepayer subsidy. It's not about revenue.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Powers. And on to the consent calendar. Anything to pull, my fellow council members? If not, may I get a motion, please?
I'd move to pass the consent calendar.
Thank you, Councilmember Engler. We have a motion and a vote, please.
Councilmember Engler?
Yes.
Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Bill De La Pena?
Yes.
Mayor Adam?
And that's a yes for me, too. Thank you.
And Mayor, that motion carries 4-0. And I have an ordinance title to read into the record. It's an ordinance amending Title VI and adding Chapter 6 to Thousand Oaks Municipal Code, prohibiting use, distribution, and sale of designated polystyrene products and limiting distribution of plastic utensils and beverage straws. And that's ordinance number 1680 NS.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. All right, we're going to start with our first public hearing this evening. If you would announce that, please.
Hearing advertised as required by law is open to consider agenda item 8A regarding the appeal of a planning commission decision that approved an upgrade to an existing wireless communications facility, DPMN 2020-70184. And at this time, we do not have any public speakers.
Thank you very much. Mr. Parker, you're going to give us the report along with Mr. Kearns.
That is correct. Thank you, Mayor.
All right.
Good evening, members of council. I will be taking us through the first portion of the presentation for the item as introduced by the clerk. It's a request to reverse a planning commission decision to deny a upgrades to a wireless facility that's existing at 1 Amgen Center Drive. To give you an idea of the vicinity of the project, it is located north of Hillcrest Drive, east of Rancho Conejo Boulevard, and south of Ventu Parkway. The subject site is identified with the red asterisk just to give you an idea of where it's located. As we zoom in and get more specific, the project site is located within the blue box in the center of your screen. This is actually the headquarter building on the Amgen campus. Most of the equipment is located within an existing equipment shelter located in the center of the roof, with an array of antennas located just north on the penthouse of that subject property. The project itself was originally approved in 2009, and that's what originally allowed that wireless equipment to be established in that location. In March of 2020, an application was filed to upgrade that equipment to new, more modern technology. On March 26, notifications were mailed to property owners within 500 foot of the subject site. We did receive correspondence with someone objecting to the facility, which triggered an administrative hearing.
Oh, no.
In June 25th of 2020, that hearing was held and the hearing officer approved said project.
Not, I can just,
However, an appeal was subsequently filed on June 20th, which set the item for a planning commission hearing on September 21st. At that hearing, the planning commission upheld the hearing officer's decision on a 4-0 vote. However, an additional appeal was filed, which is why this project is here at council this evening. In terms of the proposed project, I'll turn the presentation over to our planning manager, Steve Kearns, who will talk about the details of that proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Parker, and good evening, Mayor Adam, members of the City Council. The next few slides, I'm going to go over the project details themselves, as well as the appeal statements and staff response to those appeals. The proposed project itself, as mentioned, is an upgrade to an existing facility. So this is not a new facility. There's an existing enclosure on top of the corporate center, the corporate headquarter building, which is not going to change. The upgrade itself is to keep up with the capacity in that area, as well as provide what's called FirstNet technology, which is technology used by first responders. This involves replacement of existing antennas, and actually there's a decrease in the number from 12 antennas, which is currently at the top of the building, to 10 antennas. An increase in the remote radio units from 9 units to 12. Removal of all 12 of the tower-mounted amplifiers, and install 3 baseband units. And the entire facility, what you see there today as far as enclosure, is what you'll see if the approval is granted for the upgrade. This is a site plan of the proposed rooftop of the corporate headquarters. As shown here, this is the penthouse. Their antennas will be replaced on this portion of the penthouse. On the right side and left side of the existing enclosure, antennas will also be replaced. So there's actually a decrease in a total of 2 antennas. This is an elevation before and after. As you'll note, what you see in the top image is what exists, and what you see in the below image is what you'll see after the upgrade. And again, this is the east elevation showing the before and after, and no notable change. This is an image of what actually exists in the site. This is the enclosure here where the antennas are installed, and behind that is the penthouse. But this is, again, what you'll see after the installation is upgraded. And this is the east view. Again, no change. Now, the grounds for appeal from the appellant state basically the city may not issue a license to a non-existent entity. This statement was brought up at the administrative hearing portion of this process, at which time the staff acknowledged that the entity on the application was a brand, AT&T, and not the actual the applicant. So we did change the application, have them submit a new application with New Singular Wireless as the entity. The registered name is reflected on the administrative and planning commission approvals. And the applicant is advised at the administrative hearing that New Singular Wireless, or the appellant was advised, will be reflected on the approval letter. The second statement is that Yukon Group is not properly authorized to act on behalf of AT&T. New Singular Wireless actually submitted a letter stating that Yukon does have the ability to act on their behalf. In addition, the municipal code does allow third parties to apply for applications on behalf of owners or lessees. And the approval documents reflects the name of the applicant itself, which is New Singular Wireless PSCS. And then the applicant will be responsible for all condition compliance, including the indemnification of the city. The third grounds for appeal that the city may require the applicant to show that NEPA analysis was performed. Applicant did provide FCC special interest research and NEPA land use reports. The consultant from the applicant concluded that the facility has no significant effect on 9 special interests listed in that CSCFR section. Although NEPA analysis, because this is not a federally funded project or on federal land, it's not required. However, CEQA analysis was performed and was found to be exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. The fourth grounds for appeal is that approval is in violation of ADA due to lack of shielding and mitigation measures. Staff does not have the ability to review wireless facilities based on compliance with health effects. They just need to meet plan compliance with FCC regulations and radio frequency guidelines. So we do not have the ability to deny the facility based on contemplated or anticipated health effects if plan compliance is demonstrated. As far as environmental review, as mentioned, the project is exempt as a Class 1 exemption from CEQA as a minor alteration to existing structure. So staff Planning Commission had determined that the project complies with all applicable federal, state, and local ordinances and policies, including Resolution 97-197, which is the city's standards for wireless installations. Staff therefore recommends that City Council adopt a resolution denying this appeal, thereby upholding the approval of the upgrades for the facility under DPMN 2020-70184.
Thank you, Mr. Kearns. Questions of staff? Council members?
Mr. Mayor, Bob Engler here.
Go ahead, Bob.
Part of the documentation that was sent over by the applicant for this appeal mentioned that there was a recent San Francisco ruling that was some mitigating evidence for them. Can you go a little bit into the San Francisco ruling and does it overturn any of the FCC guidance from 1996?
Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Go right ahead. Who's that?
This is Patrick Key here.
Oh, okay, Patrick. Sorry.
And I know Dr. Kramer is on the line as well.
There we are. Hi, Patrick.
Hi. That San Francisco case, it was significant for the city in the sense of it did allow, in very unique circumstances and very specific circumstances, to consider the aesthetic operations, how the wireless facility would look aesthetically. That case, even though it has some good language for cities in a certain circumstance, is inapplicable in this situation. And that's simply because aesthetics is really not an issue in this matter. This truly is a modification of a wireless facility already there on top of a building that is not seen by the public from the public street or the public right-of-way. So again, while that case has some very minor good language for cities in some circumstances, it's really not applicable in this kind of case. And Dr. Kramer might have some more information as he was a part of that case.
I was actually the testifying expert on behalf of the city of San Francisco. Good evening, Council, Mr. Mayor. The case is not applicable because it deals with cell sites in the right-of-way. This is not a cell site in the right-of-way. Therefore, the question that was answered by the California Supreme Court has no impact on the outcome of this case tonight.
All right. Any further? Go ahead. Sorry.
Just a little follow-up that we're guided then by, in terms of any health issues, we're still guided by the FCC guidance from 1996.
That's correct.
Okay.
All right, Dr. Kramer, Mr. Heher, thank you. Any further questions before we move on to our Mayor Pro Tem? Go ahead.
Thank you. The question I have for Dr. Kramer, perhaps, the grounds of the appeal, would they pass muster in court?
I think I'm going to toss that over to Patrick to answer because it's really not a technical question.
Yeah, can you
Sure, and again, I'm not,
I was going to
Councilmember, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by pass muster in court. They do have for this appeal, they actually have 4 positions as Mr. Kearns articulated. And certainly we believe, as you can see in the staff report, and our position is that none of those arguments that they made, those 4 arguments, really establish any grounds to affirm or to grant their appeal. In fact, it actually is, it would be inappropriate to do that based on those grounds. So in other words, we're asking that you actually approve the project and deny the appeal. I can go through each one if you want to. I'm not sure which one you think are concerned that might pass muster, but I'll be happy to articulate that in more detail if I get some more clarity from you.
Thank you. No, I understand what our role is here this evening. I'm just wondering, when attorneys take up this sort of appeal, whether they do it realizing or perhaps knowing that it really has no validity.
Ms. Noonan wanted to comment?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm good now. I was where Patrick was. I was asking for clarification by Mayor Pro Tem's original question, but it's all good. He answered.
All right. All right. Any further questions? All right. Everybody good?
Was that question answered then, or I'm wondering whether we can get an answer on that?
Sure. So let me try to get a little bit more detail. So they have 4 points as to what they're making. Attorneys can argue anything. I can argue one way or the other way. The fact is that they might have a passion or a reason to say, hey, I have a position here. I don't want wireless facilities, and so I'm going to make any argument that I think is appropriate to make. So when we get this appeal, we're looking at, okay, what is your basis for your argument? What are your reasons on your appeal? And we look at those and we articulate those in the staff report, and then we respond to them and say, does this have merit or not? And our position is those arguments do not have merit. And you might hear from a representative from AT&T tonight. And as Mr. Kearns said, they don't have merit for a number of reasons. For each one of them, for example, the comment that we named AT&T. We did clarify it was New Singular Wireless PCS. They are an entity that's licensed to do business in California. They are current licensed to do business in California, and that is the name of the applicant for the project. The next comment was about UConn as a consultant. We allow consultants to follow applications. We analyze them. UConn has been doing this for a lot of carriers across Southern California. Again, not something that really has much validity as far as a reason to deny a permit, because they're just a consultant, and ultimately AT&T and New Singular Wireless PCS are responsible for the application and the permit. The third one had to do with the ADA. And again, with the ADA, it's a little bit trickier because you're looking at 2 federal laws, but a city's decision which complies with federal law, namely the 1996 Federal Telecommunications Act, is a defense to any claim arising out of the ADA or the FHA. So in this case, the city is prohibited, again, as you well know, prohibited from evaluating the RF emissions, right? The amount of RF emissions that are being produced, as long as we establish that they meet the federal standards. Our own Dr. Kramer, our consultant, we review that to make sure this project meets those standards. But if it does, in this case, we do say it does, our obligation then, you cannot no longer, the council's prohibited from looking at that any longer. It just can't weigh that anymore. And that's the federal law that we have to comply with. So the very basis of appellant's argument when it comes to the ADA is that any wireless facility, because it emits RF emissions, would affect her and would be a violation of her rights under the ADA. And we just couldn't do that because then we would never have any wireless facilities. Plus, our defense is that we're complying with the federal law under the 1996 Federal Telecommunications Act. We're following that law. And that's the basis why we believe that her position on that element is wrong. And we must, again, our recommendation is to approve the project based on those reasons.
Thank you.
If I could just add a couple of clarifying comments that, again, when we're considering wireless projects, as you are well aware, the 1996 Federal Telecommunications Act significantly limits what cities can look at, what's within our jurisdiction, what isn't within our jurisdiction. ADA is one of those issues where we have very discrete and limited ability to look at. That's because once we've established through our expert that the application complies with the FCC regulations, we are not allowed to go any further. ADA in and of itself, however, applies to whoever builds the project. We are not building the project. The wireless company is building the project. So, Mayor Pro Tem, to your question, with respect to other law firms who raise issues, it's perfectly fine and perfectly valid to raise legal concerns that they have. But from our perspective, we do not believe any of the issues that have been raised by the appellant rise to the level of giving us the authority to legally overturn the approval of this wireless facility.
Okay, how's that?
Thank you. Yes, that's good. Thank you.
We good. All right. Any further questions? If not, I'm going to turn to our appellant team, and you have a total of 15 minutes to speak, and I believe the speaker will be Mark Pollock, the appellate attorney. Are you with us, Mark?
Good evening. Sounds to me like you've made up your mind, folks. So I submitted a brief to you, which it certainly sounds like no one has read. And in my brief, on page 4, I specifically delineate the way that the Telecommunications Act of 1996 needs to be dovetailed with the terms of the ADA and the FHAA. These are all coexistent federal laws. No one has provided you as a council with a decision out of any circuit of the federal appellate courts or the Supreme Court indicating that the court has ruled that the 1996 Telecommunications Act preempts the conditions of the ADA or the FHAA. The ADA requires simply that once I have established on the record that my client has EMS, electromagnetic sensitivity, and that she's being impacted by the emanations of electromagnetic field from the proposed facility, then at that point, the council has to consider, prior to issuing the permit, whether or not reasonable mitigation can be effectuated with the applicant. Here, that hasn't been done. And the broad statement from Mr. Kramer or Dr. Kramer and others that somehow the 1996 Telecommunications Act precludes the council from considering mitigation for the purposes of the ADA is just wrong. I've cited you both Epic Systems Corporation versus Lewis, a 2018 case, 138 Supreme Court, 1612. In this case, it says when confronted with two acts of Congress allegedly touching on the same topic, the court is not at liberty to pick and choose among congressional enactments and must give effect to both. There is a way here, a way forward to give effect to both the ADA and to the Telecommunications Act. And I'm not suggesting that that way forward is to grant or deny the application. I'm suggesting that we put the matter over and sit and meet and confer. City attorney, perhaps Dr. Kramer, myself, and a representative from New Singular Wireless PCS, who now is identified as the applicant, to determine whether or not there's a methodology for limiting the amount of wattage that this facility will emit so that it can accomplish its primary goal, but at the same time avoid spillover into the neighboring residential neighborhood. This city council has received a signed petition from 1,900 residents of this community that don't want this thing. There are other people in the community suffering from EMS besides my client. The FHAA and the ADA require that there be some reasonable accommodation of their disability in granting the application for this process to go forward, for this antenna system to go up. What hasn't been presented to you at all is what will be the comparative radiation levels from the new facility versus the old facility. You haven't been told that. You haven't been told what the need is for this upgrade, what technology will be dependent upon it, and why it needs to happen, other than it needs to be upgraded to perhaps keep up with the times. That's not an adequate reason to avoid accommodation under the ADA. In terms of putting the matter over for a reasonable period of time to engage in dialogue, that should not affect the shot clock on whether or not this thing timely gets acted upon by the council. And the reason I say that is that Mr. Kearns in his presentation acknowledged that the material that I provided to the Planning Commission on entities, on the fact that New Singular Wireless signed the master licensing agreement with the city, but AT&T was identified as the applicant by the representative for the applicant, and that AT&T is simply a brand name. It's not a legal entity. So after some careful examination of this by staff, they required a new application be filed by New Singular Wireless PCS instead of under the name of AT&T. That begins the shot clock again. It starts the time running anew. And this was after the zoning administrator had already issued the permit to the wrong entity. So this was an attempt to catch up that mistake and correct it. And I applaud the city for doing that because it protects the city's ability to get lawful indemnity and lawful insurance from the real applicant. And that's what began this appeal. So now we're dealing with the ADA issue, and I would submit to you that I'm not here to make trouble for the applicant. I'm not here to make trouble for the city. I'm here to work out an accommodation that protects the health of my client. And the fact that Dr. Jonathan Kramer or others have said that you're precluded from considering the health effects of EMF under the terms of the Telecommunications Act does not prevent you from considering the health effects of the radiation from the facility under the ADA. You have an obligation to consider both laws, not to take one over the other, unless you've been provided legal authority on that notion. And no one has prevented you or presented you with legal authority to do that. So in a nutshell, without taking all the time, I believe that I've supplied you with more than enough material in the record to support my position that you have the authority to make inquiry about how broad the scope of the emanation will come out of this facility when it's done. What's the comparison between the levels now and the levels before, or the levels after the upgrade? Why is the upgrade necessary? What are the potential health effects of this in relationship to the ADA and the FHA? And I would submit to you that there may be a way to work out something with the applicant to simply power down the facility for purposes of ongoing operation so that there won't be spillover into the residential neighborhood causing harm to innocent people. And on that basis, I would submit it. And I thank you for considering my position. I think all of you want to do the right thing, and I really want to help. So thanks again for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Pollack. All right, let us hear from the applicant. And I believe the speaker will be Melissa Keith.
Mayor Adam, I believe that Mandy Jacob is also part of the appellate team, and there was an additional 6 minutes left
all
if
right.
she wanted to speak.
Thank you. Mandy, did you want to, you have about 6 minutes left if you'd like to add on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate your time.
I apologize for leaving you out there.
No problem. I just wanted to say that, you've recognized me. I've been coming to you guys for a year and a half, and it's so unfortunate that we've landed in this situation because over a year ago, I did submit to the city attorney an ADA request, not an ADA request to be accommodated at your meetings, which they have done, but an ADA request to be accommodated in my home should an issue like this arise. That was dated back in November, and I was one of 13 residents of Thousand Oaks who had submitted this. We all have individual doctors' letters and certificates saying that we have the disease of microwave radiation sickness. And within a year, I have never been contacted. We have had Dr. Kramer tell you that on numerous occasions they meet with the telecoms and the site developers. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to sit down with anyone who makes these plans. And it's really disheartening to know that it's not only me. There's another person, two people here in the community that we're going to be radiated that have been diagnosed by two different doctors. And then again, other residents outside of the community, not one has been contacted. It should be noted that the FDA was employed by the FCC to study the health effects, and the FDA, after 88 pages, said that there are a small group of EMF sensitive people that actually do need to be accommodated. And I can send you that documentation. The NIH came out in 2019, January, saying that 1 in 3 people are actually EMF sensitive. And the Thousand Oaks knows that in the 80s, you were sued under the ADA, and you did as a city have to pay out. So, it's looking ugly for my city, and I don't want it to be that. I've been a resident here for 20 years, and I've been begging for a year and a half. Can we please just sit down just the way Kramer sits with the telecoms? If you could please sit with us just to talk. And yes, they are decreasing it by 2 antennas, but no one talks about the extra 3 bands per antennas that are going to be broadcasting and spewing out this radiation over my facility, my home, my gated community. I actually, for the Planning Commission, I drove around my community and I tested the coverage because according to the FCC Section 332C7 A and B, the authority is they only want to know, do the telecoms or the applicants have coverage, and they have coverage, and I can resubmit that again. I was able to make a phone call on an AT&T phone in 4 different locations, and I recorded it. So why do they need the upgrade? I don't understand why they have to give more radiation, make me sicker, when it doesn't matter that they're decreasing it by 2 antenna. The radiation is going to be worse for me, and I just don't understand for what perspective do they need this? Again, the NEPA review was from 2015. The District Court of Appeal from 2019, August 9th, said that NEPA has to be done, and Mr. Kramer is going to tell you that I'm wrong, but it's not for federal land, it's for everything. So their NEPA report is wrong. It's, well, not wrong, it's outdated, and it needs to be updated. And Mayor Pro Tem, you asked the perfect question, can this go forward to litigation? I hate it to go forward to litigation. Can't we just sit and talk and have a lawyer represent me and just say, look, I'm sick and I'm going to get way sicker. I don't want to have to, people die from this disease. And I know your hearts. I know, especially you, Claudia. I mean, who wants a resident to die? I'm just asking to sit and talk to you guys logically. We've got lots of technicians. Unfortunately, Mr. Kramer, he's applying the IEEE, which is an engineering. They don't look at people who are sick. They look at thermal. They look and see if your body's being heated up. I'm not talking about thermal. I'm just talking about being sick. And I don't know what else to say. I did submit from the city of Malibu. It's for your public record. I'd love you to look at that, about all the misinformation that Kramer has supplied to them. And they are looking for a new consultant. Also, when I spoke to the Planning Commission and I spoke about the writ of mandamus at the Ventura Court issued under the city of Simi Valley, he denied that and said it had been thrown out in January. And we have that recorded as well. And he just spoke over me, and I called the person, Judy Bruce, who actually has submitted it, and it was not thrown out in January. So I'd really beg you to look at the information from Malibu Ordinance, suggestions of getting a new consultant, because as you can see, he already handed over the information. As soon as he said it's not technical, he gave it to Mr. Heher. So I don't know why we're deferring to him on a technical issue when you're talking about me in being sick, being disabled. It's totally irrelevant what the medical, for him, it's totally irrelevant what the medical condition is, because he's only looking at the thermal heating effects. And anyway, that's all I want to say. Please do we're just asking for 5-10 minutes of your time. This will determine whether or not I have to leave the city of Thousand Oaks. And I've been here for 20 years. And I've seen this coming, and I'm just so sad that we're in this position. And maybe the city attorneys can give you the 13 other doctors' notes from 13 different other residents that have been classified with this disease. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. Now let us hear from the applicant. They will be represented, I believe, by Melissa Keith. Ms. Keith, are you there?
Yes. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we got you.
Okay, great. Good evening, honorable members of the City Council and Mr. Mayor. My name is Melissa Keith, and I am here on behalf of Yukon Group. I'd first of all like to say thank you for giving us the opportunity to respond to the appeals brought forth for AT&T's modification project over at 1 Amgen Center Drive. I have a brief statement that I'm going to read through for the first few minutes of my presentation period. And once I am done reading through my statement, I will pass over my time to Mr. Andrew Dye, who's AT&T's legal associate, and will briefly touch on a few points regarding the appeal. So I'll go ahead and read my statement. My name is Melissa Keith, and I am here on behalf of Yukon Group, an SFC Communications Inc. company, representing a proposed wireless modification project located at 1 Amgen Center Drive, Thousand Oaks, California, 91320. The wireless company applying for the modification is AT&T, otherwise known as New Singular Wireless, PCS LLC, a Delaware limited liability company by AT&T Mobility Corporation, its manager. AT&T is proposing to modify their existing facility by removing 9 antennas and replacing with 7 new antennas, removing 6 RRUs and replacing with 12 new RRUs, and removing 12 TMAs on the existing building's rooftop. The scope of work also consists of removing 2 existing baseband units, noted as DUS-41s, and replacing with 3 new baseband units referred to as BBU 6630 within the site's existing equipment room. Additionally, 1 new DC-12 surge suppressor will be installed also within the existing equipment room. The site is located on the rooftop of an 85-foot building within a manufacturing industrial zone. The antennas are divided across 3 different sectors. Sector A is mounted onto the building's existing penthouse, while sectors B and C are mounted onto the building's mechanical enclosure. Each sector is located behind FRP screening material designed to blend the antennas into the building's existing aesthetics. For this modification, AT&T would like to utilize this opportunity to reduce the amount of materials on site by removing antennas and equipment that are no longer necessary for meeting current technological needs. In doing so, all antennas and equipment will continue to remain behind the site's existing FRP screens. The facility's leasing dimensions will not change in any aspect. The height of the wireless facility and the height of the overall building will remain the same. The site will not undergo any substantial change in appearance. This is evidenced by the plans and photo simulations that have been submitted for the subject application. Swapping out antennas and equipment is a fairly standard procedure for existing wireless facilities, as this ensures that sites remain up to date in meeting technological needs. In this case, AT&T's update is required to improve the overall 4G user experience by installing technology designed to meet capacity needs in this area of the city. I would like to emphasize that this is an existing site and the modification's purpose will serve to offload capacity for AT&T users. Instead of building an entirely new facility, it is of preference to modify sites with existing entitlements and lease agreements in which antennas and equipment are swapped out. I would also like to highlight that this upgrade will include FirstNet technology, which is a network designed to provide first responders with access to fast and reliable communications whenever needed. This modification will help first responders to stay safe throughout their work as they help others in their daily operations. And it will also help them in addressing disaster response and recovery situations in a timely manner. Keeping up with telecommunication needs is crucial, as this modification shall contribute to the quality of the city's overall infrastructure and will also ensure that network coverage services are adequately met. As the applicant representatives, we have worked closely with our planner, Wilfredo Chua, to ensure that the site and its proposal complies with jurisdictional requirements maintained by the city and federal government. By modifying an existing facility, removing any unneeded equipment, and ensuring that the site does not undergo any substantial change in appearance, we believe that a due diligence effort has been made to meet the City of Thousand Oaks requirements for properly updating telecommunication facilities. It is for these reasons that we would like to request for the City Council to uphold the city's zoning administrator decision and the Planning Commission's decision to approve the modification to AT&T's existing site located at 1 Amwin Center Drive. Thank you so much, and we appreciate your time, consideration, and assistance throughout the permitting process. And I would also just like to clarify one item. We actually didn't have to reapply when the legal name was incorporated into the project. That was done so at the stage of the administrative approval and the formal administrative approval documentation. That's when the names were amended. So this application still corresponds with the March application that was submitted earlier this year. Now I would like to pass on the remaining amount of my time to AT&T's legal associate, Andrew Dye, who will just briefly touch on some of the appellant's points that have been brought up.
Thank you, Melissa. Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, council members. To emphasize a point that Melissa made, and I believe Mr. Pollack had suggested earlier that there needs to be a need to have a modification or facility of this type. The FirstNet is a pretty important need for first responders, and basically what this technology does is it prioritizes access to that specific frequency or spectrum, and it gives those first responders precedence over all other users, which may not require such precedence for that use. So that is a important need. We feel that it benefits the safety of the general public and the first responder team. So that is a position that AT&T will always maintain. In response to items, I believe 1 and 2 of the appellant's appeal regarding name changes, I think that's been discussed pretty thoroughly tonight, and there's not much more we need to add. I did include a number of exhibits in our response, and those will be that shows evidence that we do comply. AT&T, New Singular Wireless, and Yukon Group all comply with the requirements to proceed with this application. In response to the NEPA requirements, the legal supporting support that was provided, I believe that it is not quite on point with what we are doing here for AT&T's modification. That support is based on a categorical exemption for small cell facilities, basically, and that exemption is what is defined as a major federal action. So there is no other major federal action here that would apply in this instance to a municipal permit, a discretionary permit from a municipality. So with that respect, and as Dr. Kramer had indicated, that this project is not federally funded or on federal lands. So that is additional support why the NEPA analysis is not needed. But having said that, AT&T did perform a NEPA, and there's nothing in that document or the study to show that there's any significant impact, and it does not trigger any further review or approvals from the FCC. And with regards to appellant ADA claim, and I believe there was that FHAA claim that was submitted late Friday, I believe. The Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996 is well established that this is not a topic that can be discussed, or not discussed, but as a matter of a condition or a requirement to regulate the RF emissions. Only the FCC has that authority, and state and local governments are prohibited from regulating those facilities based on emissions, provided that the applicant complies with the FCC guidelines. And I believe that Dr. Kramer's memo suggests that we do. And in regards to the final comments made by the appellant, if the address that's on the appeal form is correct, we show that her residence is about 4,800 feet away from this facility. It's an existing facility, and from that distance, I believe Melissa can correct me, but it radiates out about 2,000 feet, Melissa?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, about 1,000 feet. So it's a quarter of a mile radius. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're almost a mile away from Ms. Jacobs' home, and we do not feel that this will have any effect on that area. And with that said, thank you for your time. And based on those reasons, we request that the appellant's appeal be denied and the permit upheld.
Thank you, Mr. Dye and Ms. Keith. And staff, do you have any response that you care to make?
I believe many of the items that were brought up by Mr. Pollack and Ms. Jacob were addressed by the AT&T team, including their attorney, particularly with the ADA requirements and the reasons for this installation being upgraded. The fact that they're upgrading it to assist first responders does provide a public benefit. It is important to have that ability for them to drop other services or other uses on that facility so they can have priority and respond and perform their duties. And I think basically that's the reason for the upgrade, which was articulated by Mr. Dye. So other than that, staff does not have any other comment.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, this is Mr. Mayor, if I may, really quick.
Oh, yes,
This is
Mr.
Patrick
Hehard,
here.
go ahead.
All right, just a couple of comments, because for the record, we need to make sure the record is clear and accurate. One of them is, you heard Ms. Jacob mention that the city attorney's office did not respond to her and her ADA complaints or concerns. We, in fact, have responded to her on at least 2 occasions. The latest one was by our office in May of this year, in which we very specifically responded to her ADA issue. And again, for her to say that we did not respond is just not true, is inaccurate. Another factor that I think is very important is when we look at the RF emissions, there are comments about their ADA issues or their disabilities. I'm not questioning that. What I'm telling this board, this body, is all of those have to do with the RF emissions. And when it comes to the RF emissions, when they were approved, those guidelines, they looked at the health impacts. They did look at the health impacts. And so we are bound by those guidelines. So no matter how you argue or how you state concerns about it, it comes back down to the RF emission level. And no matter what we do, as long as that are in those guidelines, the city, any local entity, any state entity cannot address it for that reason. So no matter how you argue it, it really comes down to the RF emissions. And in this case, as Dr. Kramer has stated, those meet the federal guidelines, and therefore on that basis, for that reason, it's not a reason to deny the project. So that just needs to be very clear to you, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Heher.
Before we move on to council deliberation, just a couple of comments, and I don't know if Dr. Kramer has any additional comments.
Thank you very much. Again, for clarity of the record, I'm going to respond to a number of the items that were raised. First by Mr. Pollack. In terms of the RF spillover into neighborhoods, radio frequencies simply don't stop at a predefined distance. They continue and continue to lose strength. So this is a technical issue which is fundamental to the way that radio operates. There is no way of tuning down the emissions to stop at a particular place. The emissions will continue regardless of the power level, just by the way that radio operates. Now, the question is, and this is important, a couple of points that he raised. Number one, he talked about the old emissions versus the new emissions. That's a red herring. The red herring on this is that the Federal Communications Commission, the agency delegated by the FCC to set standards, has set those standards. And the question is not what is the difference between the old emissions and the new emissions, it's whether the new emissions comply with the FCC's rules. And I have certified by doing the review of the information provided by AT&T on their emissions that it will. So that's really the end of that from a legal standpoint. What technology is being used is another red herring because it's outside of our control to control a wireless company's technology. As I've said before, and I'll say it again tonight, we're basically in the aesthetics business, how things look, and we're also in the compliance business to determine whether a wireless facility complies with safety codes, including the RF safety codes at the federal level. I'll move on to Ms. Jacobs' comments. She's concerned that I side with the telecoms. I side with the law. So to the extent that the law is clear, and it is, that really is what I'm concerned about. I wish that the law were different, but it isn't. And in fact, the FCC just completed about a year ago a review of its standards and elected not to change it. That was a multi-year process where the public was involved in providing information as to whether the standards that were originally adopted back in 1997 were adequate, or did they have to be changed? And the commission determined that there was no evidence in the record that suggested that as to cell sites, they'd have to be changed. In terms of the question about, and by the way, I'm sorry, just for a side note, my firm does not work for the telecom companies. And interestingly, one of the documents that was put into the record tonight from Mr. Scott McCullough by the appellant, actually he's an industry attorney. It's on his website, so that was kind of strange. I think that's what I've got at this point, and of course, I'm always happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kramer. And do we have questions from my fellow council members?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Jones, good evening.
Yeah. There seems to be such a differentiation between the statements we just heard from Dr. Kramer and the professed danger that the appellant sees in her distance from the site that we're speaking of. Is this an exact science? You made the statement, or somebody did, that she's approximately a mile away, and any radiation effects would travel only about a quarter of a mile. Is that a true scientific statement, or is there some dispute about the radiation? Because she seems so adamant in her feelings that she's going to be in danger from this installation.
Let's tear this apart so that you'll better understand what's going on here, council member. Again, signals don't stop at a predetermined point. So when a wireless company, AT&T, whomever, plans a cell site, they plan for the area that they want to serve. In this case, it's about a radius of about 1,000 feet. Keith has talked about that. So that's its service area. In terms of the FCC compliance, there is no place that a human being can be in front of the antennas that will exceed the maximum permitted for uncontrolled 24/7. You don't even know that the cell site's there, exposure. So you've got to break apart the rules from the service area. And that's why when we talk about the service area, that's roughly 1,000-foot diameter. And that's why the FCC RF safety standards are different than the proposed coverage area. From the city's standpoint, we look at RF safety because that's what we're allowed to look at, not the coverage that they will afford from the particular site. Councilmember Jones, does that help?
Yeah, in other words, you're differentiating between the coverage of the site, in other words, what it can achieve, and I don't understand all the nomenclature here, but the whatever dangerous radiation effects might be a byproduct of that. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we don't use the word dangerous because, in fact, it complies with the FCC rules. To the extent that it does, it is a legal level of emissions. Well, the city doesn't answer the question about whether something is dangerous because that's not within the city's purview. The city's purview is very limited, as the city attorney and the assistant city attorney have told you, to determine compliance with the FCC rules, which the city does on essentially every single project for exactly this purpose. And some projects in the past have never made it forward out of the planning stage because they didn't comply and they got shut down. So every project that you see that comes before a decision maker has been evaluated for compliance with the FCC rules. So again, FCC compliance is public exposure. Service level is where they're actually going to serve.
But when the FCC makes a ruling, do possible health effects enter into their determination?
Well, I helped put together, in fact, co-edited and co-authored the FCC's Local Officials Guide to Transmitting Safety. That is still the gold standard book that's on the FCC's website today. So I can tell you back at the time how those rules were developed. And they were developed in conjunction with the FCC talking to other government agencies, to radiological health organizations, to public groups. They looked at standards from other countries. And they basically said, okay, this is what we think is correct for the US. We know that a certain level of power can actually produce a measurable effect in humans. So we don't want that. And the FCC actually set their maximum public exposure at 2% of the level where a human can actually, a physiological effect can be measured. Now, Ms. Jacobs is talking about a different type of effect, which is one that is not based on and I want to be respectful to her because I don't want to mischaracterize her own reaction to RF. But the issue here is that the FCC looked at what level of radio frequency emissions causes something in a human being, and then they set their maximum exposure level at 1/50th of that, 2%. Interestingly, well, I don't want to deep dive into the technology. I think that's probably enough if you're satisfied with the answer.
Yeah, I think it's a, it's a satisfactory answer, but are medical doctors involved in these determinations?
At the FCC level, the answer is yes. Radiological health officers, MDs who are expert at radiological effects from RF emissions, they're part of the group that advises the FCC. So yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Any further questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I do have a question, actually from Mr. Dye, if he's still with us. I would imagine he is. You mentioned in one of your statements that the emission or the antenna are about a mile away and that you feel that it will have no effect on the neighborhood or on the applicant's home. When you say you feel that it won't have an effect, what are you basing that on?
I think feels probably an incorrect word, but based on what Dr. Kramer is saying, the emissions that are, as long as we are compliant with the FCC guidelines, they are deemed safe, if you want to use that word, but they are deemed safe. So my point was just to show a distance between the facility and where Ms. Jacobs' home is. And as Melissa and Dr. Kramer had indicated, the radius for coverage is about 1,000 feet. So it does not stop the radiation from emitting beyond that, but as the report from Dr. Kramer indicates, we are compliant and it is safe from that perspective.
Thank you. I also have a question for Dr. Kramer, perhaps, or maybe even City Attorney. The appellant's or the applicant's attorney has made several points regarding accommodation. And yes, as Mr. Heher states, everything comes down to health hazards. And we really can't base decisions on health hazards if the frequency is within the permissible range. EMF sensitivity is an actual health problem. People have EMS sensitivity. It's been proven. There is absolutely no doubt. And it is difficult to live with EMF sensitivity when you are completely surrounded by this all day long, 24 hours a day. And it is tough for persons who have that. And I imagine it will only get worse as technology advances and people are moving away from 5G, going into 6G, 7G perhaps. Nonetheless, the laws have not changed. Congress hasn't changed any emission standards. So I would like for either Dr. Kramer or our city attorney's office to respond to specific points that Mr. Pollack made in regard to accommodation.
Who wants to take that up?
So I'll start, and Mr. Kramer can follow up with me. With respect, I mean, I think that we, I thought that we kind of talked about this. Maybe we're not clear enough. When you look at the 1996 Telecommunications Act, it explicitly delegates the health and safety components of wireless facilities to the FCC, and basically delegated to the FCC the ability to promulgate rules that set thresholds for public health and safety. Once that is done, the city does not have the authority to interject itself and conclude that those standards are not sufficient from a public health and safety perspective. With respect to reasonable accommodation requests, as Mr. Heher also explained, we did in fact respond to Ms. Jacobs in particular on at least 2 occasions, inviting her to have further discourse. There was no further discourse, however, requested. We've responded to other people as well. From an ADA perspective, however, the project applicant, the conditions of approval require that the project applicant comply with all laws, federal, state, and local laws. At the end of the day, if there is an ADA issue, the applicant and the appellant should be having that conversation, because the city is not legally able to change the parameters of the project or deny the project based on this issue. So I'm not sure if there's anything else Mr. Kramer can talk about.
No, actually, City Attorney Noonan said exactly what I was going to say, which is this is something between the applicant and the appellant and the applicant. So that's all.
So what I take away from this is that persons who have EMF sensitivity issues need to then sue the carriers directly?
I'm certainly not going to give them, tell them how to move forward with any type of litigation. But again, when you look at ADA compliance, cities comply with the ADA with respect to our sidewalks because we are the ones that construct those projects. But if there's a private building that is constructed by a private developer and there are ADA violations in that building, the city is not sued based on that. The private developer, the building owner, is sued based on those ADA violations. This is no different. AT&T, Wireless Singular, I can't remember the name, Singular Wireless, is applying for an application to construct a project. In that regard, they are legally responsible for complying with all of the federal laws, including the ADA.
And thank you. And what about the shot clock that Mr. Pollack mentioned as well?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Heher and Mr. Kearns, who have a better understanding of the timeline on this project.
I would have to actually check to see. I know that we reached out to AT&T because we did have a shot clock. A shot clock can be modified. The timeline can be modified with the permission of the applicant, which would be AT&T in this case, and the city. We certainly knew, and it's usually a cooperative type of process to ensure that we are going through the permit process in a timely manner. Again, this is not a small wireless facility one where there's a very short time shot clock that we have to deal with. This is a macro site. So even though we've had these, again, this is the third basically hearing on this matter. I think we're okay with the shot clock right now because we are processing this and we're doing our best to process this application. And again, it's with the shot clock, it's hard to say that there's certainly no change from the shot clock based on the change of the name because it was always been processed as AT&T and any subsidiary and the consultant is part of that team. So that's really not an issue for us to consider. And again, since we're having this hearing and we're moving this matter forward, I don't think there's really any basis for the applicant, AT&T, to complain to the city about the shot clock.
Thank you.
I will note, however, that with respect to the project, the process of this particular project, there was a continuance requested by the appellant at the Planning Commission level that also extended that time.
Mr. Gard, can I ask one further question?
Yes, Councilmember Jones.
Yeah, Madam Attorney, therefore, if we say we're in compliance with the FCC on any of these matters, does that mean that we are then not liable in any lawsuit for anything that we approve?
Well, the position that I have is, first of all, the city is issuing a permit. If the city did something, for example, let's assume that the city went through the CEQA process, and prepared a CEQA document, and it was legally deficient. If we were sued on that, that's one thing. With respect to this case, however, if this permit is approved, first of all, the applicant defends and indemnifies the city. And second of all, the issues that are being raised, particularly the ADA issue, should be attributed to the project applicant and not the city. the city will definitely be named in a lawsuit because it's the issuance of the permit. But with respect to the actual project and who defends and indemnifies it, it would be the applicant that would indemnify the city.
But if we are named in a lawsuit, is that our defense, that we say that we're FCC compliant?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Before we move on to the rebuttal, I just needed to correct one other area of the record. I believe Mr. Pollock indicated that a petition with 1,900 signatures opposed to this project had been presented. Staff did not receive that, and it is not a part of the record.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I didn't see that either, as a matter of fact. So if for some reason this permit were to be denied, the city would be subject to litigation, most probably, would it not, Ms. Noonan?
Well, in these types of situations, to be very blunt, the city would be subject to litigation under either analysis. If we approve it, obviously the appellant might choose to sue the city. If we approve the appeal and deny the project, then we would probably be subject to litigation by the applicant.
Mm-hmm. And if we were to deny the permit, we'd have to have a reason for doing so, wouldn't we?
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, if there's no further questions, I'm going to go to the appellant for a 5-minute rebuttal.
Well, I think that might be me. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Briefly, addressing the points that have been made, I believe it was Melissa Keith who said that there was not a new application filed, but that there was a modification of an existing application. What confounds me here is that after I raised all of the entity issues with the city at the Planning Commission, and staff specifically said on page 2 of the staff report, specifically identify the accurate AT&T entity who will be responsible for the permit conditions and management responsibilities for the facility. That was a question that staff asked the applicant. The applicant responded that, quote, New Singular Wireless PCS LLC is the correct name for the applicant. And yet, throughout this entire evening, all of the staff, all of the people involved in opposing my appeal have continued to reference AT&T as the applicant. AT&T is not an existing entity in California. In addition, when Melissa Keith said that Yukon Group did all the work that they did on behalf of AT&T Mobility Corporation, the manager of New Singular Wireless PCS, I want to be very clear that I've submitted documentation into the record to show that AT&T Mobility Corporation is a Delaware corporation not permitted to do any business within the state of California. They're not registered with the Secretary of State for the state of California. So any documentation that they've submitted on behalf of that entity is void. It's not valid, which means any documentation that that entity signs on behalf of New Singular Wireless to indemnify the city and hold them harmless in litigation is worthless paper. It's useless. Mr. Heer, you know what I'm talking about. You've reviewed this stuff. You know that New Singular Wireless manager, AT&T Mobility Corporation, is not registered with the state of California. They have no basis to come before you and execute documents, submit documents, or sign documents on behalf of New Singular Wireless. That is doing business within the state of California. Moving on to the ADA issue. When I talk about reasonable accommodation, I'm not talking about the necessity for this body in any way to control the level of emissions by which this facility would impact the neighboring residential neighborhood. That could be accomplished with shielding, with additional shielding to protect the neighborhood. That would be reasonable accommodation, and the city could require such if it was properly engineered and submitted as mitigation by the applicant so as to downplay the impact of the radiation on the residential neighborhood. There's been no evidence submitted at this hearing that radiation submission to the residential neighborhood is required by the applicant to maintain first responder capability for this technology. There's no reason that's been given to this body that such emissions can't be shielded, and that would be reasonable accommodation. The city has the ability to comply with both laws. I think it was Mr. Here, might have been Mr. Dye, pointed out that the condition of the permit requires that the applicant shall apply with all laws. That would be the Telecommunications Act, as well as the ADA, as well as the FHAA. This body has the ability to request such compliance as a condition of the application. On that basis, I would submit it. And again, I thank you for your heartfelt consideration. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Pollack. And now we'll hear from the applicant with a 5-minute rebuttal.
May I just finish that minute and a half? Sorry.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. You do have more time. Go ahead, Ms. Jacobs.
Is that okay? Sorry.
Certainly.
And I really want to thank each and every one of you for taking all these questions to heart. I know it's taking a lot of time, and I just want to say something. Kramer says that it's his definition of the law. When he's talking about his definition of the law, he's talking about the FCC. He knows nothing about the ADA. This is why you need to defer to Mark Pollack. When he's talking about medical doctors in the IEEE, the IEEE is run by engineers. They only look at the thermal heating. You can take my body, and when I can't breathe, and when I have migraines, and when I'm throwing up, and when I can't get out of bed, I have no thermal effects happening to me. The radiation is coming to me. So to just defer and say, oh, because Kramer says that that's fine, that's not fine. It's like Mr. Pollack in his brief has said, there are 2 federal laws that need to be here, and the city has gone and had to pay out an ADA. I don't want to go that way. All I'm asking for, and Mr. Heho, this is the second time you've said you've contacted me, but because I don't get to sit and talk to you face to face, I don't know when you contacted in May. Could you contact me again? I'd love to talk to you. I've spent $3,000 and I would love to talk to someone. We don't have to make a decision tonight. Can we just sit and talk person to person? I don't want the city out of business. I've been asking for 1.5 years. I can't keep begging. I'm literally begging. I've had to employ a lawyer for me to come and beg for my health and to be in a situation that we didn't want happening. We've been asking for the ordinance to take this ADA into account. And Kramer's definition of law is his definition from an engineering. It is not an ADA well-versed person. He even didn't know that the ADA was referenced in the TSA.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. Thank you. And now we will hear from the applicant with their rebuttal, if you have a rebuttal.
Thank you. The only rebuttal I'd like to make is regarding the entity information. It appeared that Mr. Pollack's main concern was the indemnity obligation from AT&T to the city. As long as the approval is in the correct entity name, then we do satisfy that requirement. We have an obligation, AT&T that is, to indemnify the city for anything related to the permit approval. And with respect to the further discussions on the EME emissions, we'll rest with what we had previously stated. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Dye. All right. I'm going to close the public hearing, and we'll open it up for council discussion.
Mr.
Yes.
Claudia, Before we close the public hearing, may I ask a question of staff, or can I ask the question after you close it?
You can ask it right now. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mr. Pollack mentioned the legalities of the application, that the company is really not licensed or permitted to operate in California. Can Mr. Heher speak to that?
Absolutely. So in my hand here is a Secretary of State certificate of status. This is something we pulled. I personally pulled this weeks ago, probably months ago, because of the administrative hearing. This is for New Singular Wireless PCS LLC, licensed to do business in California. They have the right to do business in California. That is the name of the applicant in the permit. This will be the one that will be responsible for identifying the city. It is a subsidiary of AT&T. And again, we say Verizon, we say AT&T, we say Frontier. We do use those words because we're thinking of the general group of AT&T, or the body of a corporation that size. So it's not infrequent that people do that. But when it comes to, like you said, the legality, we make sure that we actually have the who's got to be responsible, who is licensed and certified in the state of California by the Secretary of State to do business.
Thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
All right, very good. Then we will close the public hearing and open it up for council discussion and or a motion. Who would like to start?
I will go ahead.
All right, Councilmember Engler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think that the things have changed since the last time we've talked about this. It seems that we are bound by the FCC guidance. I mean, I've read the guidance just as a layman, and it's pretty explicit that we don't have the ability to look at medical impacts at all, that they have determined that this is safe, and that doesn't diminish at all the feelings and the illness that people like Mandy feel. I don't like having our hands tied this tightly, but it seems to me that the FCC is the guiding principle here, and because of that, we're going to have to go with that that guidance. I would like to, given that, I would like to move that we deny the appeal, but I'd love to hear more of what my fellow councilmen have to say.
All right, we have a motion. Any comment to the motion?
I would like to comment to the motion.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I have stated, there are many persons, not only this country but elsewhere, who have EMF sensitivities, and their lives are impacted by emissions, radiation, not only from telecommunications antennas, but from telephones, microwaves, I mean, other equipment in our homes. And I will say that, as terrible as that is, this appeal is based, again, on health. And this particular application is within the law of EMF emissions at the federal level. So it really, I don't know how else to put it other than, yes, I see that people are sick from it, but if the application is within those guidelines and parameters, the city really has no position to take other than what we are required to do. So I have to agree with Mr. Engler, my colleague, and I just hope that perhaps A new Congress will take up this issue. We have appealed to our federal representatives. We have appealed to the FCC. And we do need a change in this law, in the Telecommunications Act. We do. It's outdated. But unfortunately, a change does not come early enough for this particular case.
Thank you. Councilmember Jones, would you like to comment?
No, I would just say I concur with the remarks of Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Engler.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, if the RF emissions meet the requirements, we just don't have any grounds to grant this appeal. And as Dr. Kramer said, that leaves us in the aesthetics business. And is there any aesthetic problems with this? No, it looks the same as it did. It would look the same as it did before it was modified. So there's just nothing really that we could base a denial of the project on that I see. And I am sympathetic to Ms. Jacobs' plight. However, I'm going to have to concur with my colleagues. And if there's no further comments, we do have a motion on the floor to deny the appeal, and I would ask for a vote, please.
Councilmember Engler?
Yes.
Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Bill De La Pena?
Yes.
Mayor Adam?
Yes.
And Mayor, that motion carries 4-0.
All right, thank you. All right, we have a second public hearing this evening. If you would announce that, please, Ms. Rodriguez.
Hearing advertised as required by law is open to consider Agenda Item 8B regarding the expansion of the existing helipad at Los Robles Regional Medical Center, SUMN 2020-70422. And speakers are requested to state their name and community of residence for the record. 5 individuals have presented speaker cards, and pursuant to council standards, each speaker will have 5 minutes.
Thank you. And Mr. Parker and Mr. Kearns, you're up again.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening once again, City Council. This is an application as introduced by the clerk to expand an existing helipad by approximately 1,900 square feet to accommodate larger emergency helicopters. To give you some perspective on where this is located, the red asterisk in the center of your screen, which is located south of Avenida de las Flores, north of Jans Road, and east of Lynn Road. As we zoom in closer, the project site itself is highlighted in red, with the subject property indicating the location of the existing helipad, which is on the roof of the parking structure that serves Los Robles Hospital. The plus is an exact indicator of where it's currently located. And as requested by this application, they're proposing to expand in this area. An application for a minor modification was originally submitted in August of 2019. This was going through staff processing when a letter of objection was received, which required staff to schedule an administrative hearing. On May 28th, that hearing was held, at which time the application was approved and the decision itself was not appealed by anyone. What's interesting about this case is between May 28th and July 7th, the applicant team found out that Caltrans was not going to accept the approval. As such, we sent it to City Council as a consent calendar item on July 7th. That was approved that night. The applicant then took that approval, which was the second one, and submitted it to Caltrans, but unfortunately, they found that it didn't meet the Caltrans requirements for this particular application. They denied it because City Council had not explicitly approved the expansion to the helipad. This is unusual in terms of a city process because city requirements do not require city councils to approve applications of this nature. Therefore, the applicant submitted a new application in July of 2020, which was heard by the Planning Commission in September, at which time it was approved unanimously. At the Planning Commission hearing, there was one person that spoke in opposition to the project, which ultimately resulted in a recommendation of approval to City Council here this evening. And at this juncture, I'll turn it over to Mr. Steve Kearns, who will talk specifically in relation to the site plan.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Depicted on this slide is actually the site plan of the hospital facility. The hospital is this bigger, the L-shaped type building to the top of the image. The existing parking structure is at the bottom left of the image, and the helipad is located centrally on the rooftop, shown in this area here. This is an image from the rooftop looking northeast through the site. The helipad is shown in this area here. Again, the helipad looking northwest. And from the top of the helipad looking southeast. The helipad expansion is designed to accommodate these new Firehawk helicopters, which are larger and heavier than the existing helicopters used currently. And the proposal involves expanding the existing 50 by 50 foot helipad to 65 foot by 68 feet, which is an increase of about 1,900 square feet. The extension will extend south to, from the existing location and cantilever over the parking space, existing parking area. And it'll be structurally upgraded to support the additional weight of the Firehawk helicopters. An emergency staircase will also be added to the west side, and lighting will be upgraded to energy efficient LED lights and provide night vision capability for the landing helicopters. This image here demonstrates the expansion. In yellow at the bottom is the extension of the helipad, and in red is the location of the new emergency staircase, which will result in deletion of 3 parking stalls. Now again, the reason for the expansion and the upgrade to the structure is to accommodate these new Firehawk helicopters, which are converted military Black Hawk helicopters. The primary use of these choppers will be for firefighting, and because they are faster and have more water capacity for fighting fires. And these helicopters are also used for search and rescue and medical evacuations. Now, the expansion and the structural upgrade will allow these Firehawks to land in the event of a catastrophic event, such as the Woolsey Fire, which we recently experienced, and for transporting injured firefighters or airlift victims during a search and rescue mission. It should be noted that the Los Robles Hospital is the only level 2 trauma center in East Ventura County, and the helipad is an integral part of the trauma center's operations. Community Memorial in Ventura is the only other in Ventura County. So this expansion is not going to result in a significant change to the actual operation of the helipad. The helicopters that travel in and out of the hospital will be the same as they are now, except in a catastrophic event. These smaller Bell helicopters will be the primary method of medical air transport. And these Firehawks, again, will only be used in the event of a catastrophic event and search and rescue missions. So as part of the application, the applicant did prepare a noise study, which demonstrated the noise impacts on the sensitive uses in the area, which included the Chinese Christian Church, which is just south of the project across Johns Road, and the residential areas to the north and southwest and northeast and east. The infrequent use of the helipads, again, because of the nature of their use during catastrophic events, will result in a negligible effect on noise in the area. The noise levels from the project were determined below the noise element decibel ratings. But what's more important to note here is that the municipal code actually anticipates noise from emergency events occurring and exempts these noise sources from the noise ordinances. And the noise ordinance is the implementation tool for the noise element of our general plan. And this tool is not applicable for these types of operations. So this project was evaluated in accordance with CEQA and was found to be a Class 1 exemption since it involves a negligible expansion of the use. The use itself will remain predominantly the same. The operations will not change significantly, and only during catastrophic events will the Firehawk helicopter visit this helipad. So in conclusion, the current helicopter operations remain the same, and since timely care is critical in medical emergencies, there is a public benefit to the community and region which outweighs the minimal noise impacts from the use of the helipad by these Firehawk helicopters. Staff is therefore recommending that City Council adopt a resolution approving the expansion of the helipad as recommended by the Planning Commission. And this concludes staff's introduction. Staff is available for questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions of staff before we go to the applicant?
Mr. Mayor, I do have a question.
Yes, go right ahead.
So city approval, just to clarify, city approval would be required in order for this project to move forward?
The Caltrans Division of Aeronautics requires City Council approval of the helipad expansion in order for them to issue the heliport permit to the hospital for use of the helipad.
And I'll just add to that, as Patrick Heher can speak to it as well, because he had countless conversations with Caltrans on this issue, and we viewed it as a bit of a technicality. Caltrans has a strict reading of the way their policy indicates, and they have a very strict interpretation of how the body has to act and in what manner they have to act. So it's much more of a technicality. But yes, Mr. Kearns is correct that from their perspective, it's affirmative action by the council is required.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Jones.
Yeah, just one question. Are the Firehawk helicopters going to be used only in case of fires, of evacuating people from fires? Is that their only use?
Yes, the primary use of the Firehawk helicopters are to operate in catastrophic events for evacuation, search and rescue, and fighting fires. So only in events where there is an injury and a person needs to be transported to the hospital will the Firehawks visit the site.
So is it my understanding then that the smaller Bell helicopters would be used in every other situation?
Yeah, I believe so, Councilmember Jones. I'm just looking at the speaker list, and we do have Sheriff Bill Ayub and Fire Chief John Spikerman, along with Steve Carroll, the head of EMS for the county. I would imagine they'll, during their comments, will likely speak to that issue.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, go right ahead.
One more question, thank you. I know we've had a complaint or two about concerns regarding noise. Should the noise become a problem, what would be the what mitigation could be taken?
Well, again, I think it's important to clarify that we're not looking at the existing operation or discussing whether or not the helipad will operate as it's been operating. What we're looking at in this application is expansion of an actual physical surface to accommodate a larger helicopter in the event of an emergency. So in that respect, the noise impacts will be so minimal because of these helicopters visiting the site only during the catastrophic events, then that it does not affect the noise analysis that was prepared when the helipad went through its approval process in 2010.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Bob Engler here.
Yes.
So this really is an adjustment to the existing helipad. We're not anticipating, though, any increase in usage by any helicopters, especially the Firehawks.
Yes, as presented to staff, the Firehawk helicopters will only be used during catastrophic events. Again, wildfire or a search and rescue mission. So these will not become part of the day-to-day operation of the the facility, and the transport of trauma victims will be through the Bell Huey, the smaller helicopters.
And according to your staff report, it was only during exigent circumstances such as a search and rescue where there had to be a direct response back to the hospital for life safety. Is that still the case?
Yes, that is the case.
All right, very good. Let us go to the applicant then, Los Robles Hospital. I believe Austin Manning will be the initial speaker, and then we'll hear from our public speakers after that. So, Austin?
Good evening. I'm Austin Manning. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Los Robles Health System. I want to thank you all for taking time this evening to hear this request. We appreciate you all previously approving this project and bearing with us as we address this technicality with Caltrans. If you can advance the slide, please. Mr. Kearns has done a nice job of introducing this project, so I won't spend much time on the details other than to point out that these two new helicopters being brought on by the Ventura County Air Unit, as stated previously, will be primarily focused on firefighting and search and rescue. That being said, we do anticipate that there may be situations where our first responders would need to bring either a firefighter or someone from a search and rescue mission directly to the hospital. And we want to make sure that we're positioning Los Robles Health System to be in the best place to be able to support the community and to support our first responders. Next slide, please. Here you can see the overall campus of the health system and the existing helipad that we will be upgrading. As has been previously stated, we are the Level 2 Trauma Center in the eastern part of Ventura County. And given the increase that we seem to be seeing over the last couple of years around wildfire activity, we believe it's in the best interest of our community that Los Robles be allowed to upgrade the existing helipad to ensure that we can accommodate our first responders. Next slide, please. Here you can see from an overview the existing helipad on the left side and then the upgraded helipad overlaid on the right-hand side. As was previously mentioned, current pad, which is 50 by 50, it will be expanded to 65 by 68 feet. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Chris of Meridian Consultants to speak to the noise study that we conducted.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. My name is Chris Karikian, Principal and Director of Air Quality and Acoustics with Meridian Consultants, based out of Westlake Village. My previous experience includes preparing a noise study for the recently approved helipad project in the city of Azusa, where we assessed noise impacts with the renovation and construction of a rooftop helistop to be used for organ transplant delivery services. Additionally, we assisted the city of La Jolla preparing a noise study for the proposed new hospital tower, where we assessed noise impacts on the building facade itself to where the intensive care units are located several floors below the helistop. This addresses the comment related to why Meridian Consultants was chosen to prepare this noise study, as we have extensive experience with this unique noise source generated from helicopters and in assessing both on and off-site noise levels. This noise study was prepared to assess the potential noise impacts in the event emergency helicopters are to be used. In order to assess future noise impacts, we first had to understand the existing environment as it exists today. This addresses the comment related to a request for a study to be prepared to assess current conditions, as this study does just that. Both short-term and long-term noise monitoring was conducted to collect data within the vicinity of the site with both helicopters present and not present. In order to assess noise levels at different barriers and heights, a 3D noise modeling software was used to assess current conditions and future noise levels. This addresses the comment questioning the use of the model as opposed to the previous outdated and not recommended INM model that is mainly used to assess regional impacts and lacks certain capabilities. This model takes into account factors such as topography, vegetation, propagation from buildings and existing noise barriers to provide a localized assessment of the project's vicinity and surrounding neighborhoods. To verify our modeling assumptions are accurate, the current conditions were also modeled to compare the results to the real-time data that was gathered. As we found, our modeling assumptions yielded to approximately 2 decibels higher than what the real-time data gathered provided us, proving that our assumptions are accurate and the analysis provides a conservative and worst-case scenario conclusion. This noise study assesses daily impacts as the event occurs, not weekly, not monthly. That being said, the noise study clearly states the unlikely scenario and conservative assumption of a flight occurring within every hour during the entire 24-hour period, extrapolated to 720 flights in a month. This rejects the comment stating the assumption of the number of flights was stated and rejects the notion of the number of weekly and monthly flights impacting the conclusion of the noise study, as the assumption used in the study is far greater than what currently occurs. The study concluded that in the event an emergency helicopter such as the Firehawk or the Blackhawk was to be used, that noise levels would be within the applicable local standards. This concludes my statement. If you have any questions, I remain at your disposal. Thank you.
All right. Any further comment from the applicant?
This is Austin Manning speaking again. I would just like to indicate that there were a number of letters submitted from our first responders, including the Ventura County Sheriff's Office, the Ventura County Public Health, our EMS administrators, and the fire as well, supporting this, as well as several members of the community. And so those, I believe, have been made available to the City Council. If not, we're happy to provide those. And I'll just conclude by saying thank you again for your time this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Manning. And we're going to go to our public speakers now. And first up is Sheriff Ayub.
Well, good evening, Mayor Adam, council members, Mr. Powers. Thank you for having me here this evening. I did want to talk about the potential upgrade to the helipad at Los Robles Regional Medical Center. As I believe you know, the Sheriff's Office, in collaboration with the Ventura County Fire Department, operates an aviation public safety unit in Ventura County. And we are the only public safety aviation unit in the county. The unit currently uses 4 Huey aircraft. Those are made by Bell Helicopter, and they are a medium-sized helicopter, and we use them for a variety of things, ranging from law enforcement support to medevac operations, to search and rescue operations, to firefighting. For a number of years now, we have been looking for successor aircraft. The Huey aircraft are Vietnam conflict vintage, so they're 50-plus years of age. And while they're in excellent operating condition, they are becoming more and more difficult to operate. So about 2 to 3 years ago, the military started surplusing the Sikorsky UH-60 aircraft. That's what most of us know as the Black Hawk helicopter, tried and true military workhorse helicopter that actually replaced the Huey as a primary medium to large utility helicopter. The military surplusing those helicopters created some opportunities for public safety organizations to capitalize on that aircraft and acquire them at a reasonable price. And the county fire department has acquired 3 such aircraft. 2 are being upfitted for service life, primarily as firefighting aircraft, but there is a very high likelihood that they will see service as rescue helicopters, medevac helicopters, as we see our Huey aircraft being harder and harder to maintain as time goes on. So at present, the Black Hawk helicopter is significantly longer than the Huey. It's about 7 feet longer and significantly heavier. And what makes it even more different than the Huey is that it sits on wheels, 2 wheels at the front of the fuselage, 1 at the rear of the tail boom, which makes it a very large profile for any type of landing pad. The helipad at our trauma centers, one being at Los Robles, the other at the Ventura County Medical Center, are too small to accommodate the Black Hawk. And if they're not upgraded, the likelihood of us being able to use those as an emergency trauma center with the air rescue ships is very small. We would have to land at some offsite location and transfer a patient via a ground ambulance, which could cost lives. So this is truly about public safety. The likelihood of the use of the helipad at the hospital is not likely to change. The air unit delivered 14 people to Los Robles Medical Center last year. We've delivered 8 this year. Most of those flights are midday to late afternoon. And that's a pattern that's continued over time, as most of the people that we transfer are people that have suffered traumatic injuries in the backcountry, and they need to get to a trauma center immediately for life-saving efforts. So I fully support the idea of expanding the helipad. I understand there's concerns with noise in the neighborhood. I don't see that changing much with the Blackhawks coming in versus the Hueys. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sheriff Ayoub. Next up is our Fire Chief, John Spikerman. Evening, John.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. On behalf of the Fire Chief, Mark Lorenzen, he just wanted me to express his full support of the project to upgrade the helipad. For our mission, the upgrade will be necessary to accommodate the new Firehawk helicopters. Like I think Sheriff Ayoub said, there's only 2 trauma centers in Ventura County, and Los Robles Hospital is the one located in the East County, and the other is VCMC, which is located in the city of Ventura. So any trauma type calls on the East County are going to go to Los Robles Hospital. We don't see any increase in any calls or trauma calls going to the hospital just based on improving the helipad. You know, the calls will be the calls. If it's a trauma call and the Black Hawk is used, then that will be critical for the citizens' care. But when a citizen of Ventura County does require a trauma center, we need to be able to land whatever helicopter is available. They are mechanical pieces of machinery. They do break down. They do have to go down for maintenance. The main ship is the Bell Huey, but the Black Hawk will be used if one of those Hueys are up for maintenance. And the fire department's mission is to provide the highest level of care possible to any citizen suffering from a traumatic injury, and upgrading the helipad will give us that ability to meet our mission. I heard a couple of concerns that were being addressed, and the Firehawks are bigger, they are heavier, they can drop a lot more water, but our research shows the helicopter itself is actually quieter than one of the Hueys. So hopefully that will help with some of that noise. If we have to bring in the Black Hawk, the increased noise should not be because of that Firehawk helicopter. As some of the safety and performance features, they're a dual engine aircraft, which for safety reasons, flying over homes, they are a mechanical piece of machinery, and it does have 2 engines. So that does add a safety margin when we have to fly over neighborhoods to perform those emergencies. So for the fire department, upgrading the helipad will allow us to meet our commitment to the public, and that's why we're in support of the upgrade to the helipad. And that's it for me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Spikerman. Steve Carroll is here with us from Ventura County EMS. Steve?
Hi, Mayor Adam, council members, Mr. Powers, good evening. I'm Steve Carroll, the Emergency Medical Services Administrator for the county. On behalf of our county EMS system, I would like to add our support to Los Robles Regional Medical Center's proposal to upgrade their helipad. As one of the 2 trauma centers, as Chief Spikerman and the other speakers have mentioned, Los Robles is one of our 2 trauma centers, and it's highly important that they're able to accommodate our trauma victims in a timely fashion, and they need to be able to safely accommodate various helicopters that are in service today. The only alternative to an expanded heliport is going to be to identify a nearby location, such as a school or a park, which would then require transfer by ground ambulance and will significantly delay getting trauma patients and critical patients into our definitive care at our hospital emergency rooms. So it's not a desirable alternative. We don't expect these larger helicopters to be the primary ship, as they've mentioned previously. The smaller helicopters are our primary transport for medical and rescue calls, but there is a potential that these larger helicopters will need to be able to safely evacuate a patient and be able to transport to one of our trauma centers, and this is highly important. So appreciate your consideration for this public safety improvement to our county. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next up is Tim Hagel, our retired Chief of Police and lifetime Thousand Oaks ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to thank all the council for this opportunity. This hits close to me. I want to thank all the aviation first responders. Having spent 13 years working in that helicopter landing at the hospital, I know the effects that has over the last 40 and 50 years of residents in the Conejo Valley. It's interesting that I got to talk to one of the first pilots that was hauling sheriffs and fire rescue personnel in the late 1960s, and the first helicopter arriving at Los Robles Hospital in 1968 that the Sheriff's Department had weighed less than a Prius today, or a Volkswagen thing. And the victim had to ride on the outside, and the doctor or nurse had to be driven to the hospital in a fire truck or police car from the scene. And we modified over the years, getting ready for the Hueys in the 1970s that we're currently using today, and expansion has to occur. But what doesn't have to change is that our support for maybe the next 40 years of bringing life-saving equipment, first responding equipment for trauma for people in the Conejo Valley by the sky as rapidly and safely as possible to the surgeon and nurses at Los Robles Hospital. These are our own Conejo Valley residents that are hauled to the hospital here in life-saving manner. So I just wanted to offer my thanks not only to the aviation first responders, my support, but thank all of them and Los Robles Hospital for keeping Conejo Valley safe. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Tim. Karen Martin is our next speaker. Karen?
Good evening. My name is Dr. Karen Martin. I live at the southwest corner of Lynn and Jans in the western flight path. My property is contiguous to Los Robles, yet due to some magic at the assessor's office in 2013, I am no longer considered to be within 500 feet of the facility. I learned in 2008 that noise levels exceeded the conditionally accepted levels for residential zones during public hearing for the hospital expansion. Since becoming a level 2 trauma center, noise levels have increased due to low-flying helicopter traffic, day and night, and increased street traffic. I've made many calls to the hospital and the FAA. I've gotten no response from Los Robles over the past years, but the FAA suggested I do a video log, and I use Flight Radar 24 to document the air traffic. The reason a noise study is required for the helipad enlargement is to evaluate the impact on the community. This study is so poorly executed, it had to be amended before the administrative hearing because it failed to include data for the noise impact of the new Firehawk helicopter. Seriously? Planning tells us there will be no increase in the number of flights. The number was initially 5 per month. My number, based on a hard count, was 9 per month, and most recently, Lori Young says 3 to 4 per week. At this point, it feels like they're just making up numbers. We are told Ventura County will only use the Black Hawk in extreme emergency. When isn't a medical airlift not an emergency? Here's a fun fact. Only 20% of the flights into Los Robles are from the Sheriff's Department. The other 80% are from Reach and Mercy Air. No information was given about the makeup of their fleet or any promises that they're not going to be bringing in a lot more helicopters. Another concern I have for the validity of their data is the lack of documentation for the height of the dosimeter at the Korean Christian Church relative to the helipad for the test flight that is the basis for this extrapolation and the mitigation. It would appear the church sits above the helipad and noise isn't as loud if you're above it. Timing and duration of the baseline noise level is also questionable. It was done one day on winter break during the CLU in Lorena, so traffic was less. A meter was placed in the northwest flight path, but not in the western flight path. My house, Lynn and Jan's. This is where the highest noise levels were recorded during 2008. You don't want the neighborhood to know how loud it is here. The Planning Commission told us there will be no increase in vibration. There is no information in this study concerning vibration. That would require a C-weighted study. How can they make a statement with nothing to validate it? Saying it doesn't make it so. The Planning Commission tells us it won't affect our property values. Again, how do you make this promise? Maybe because our proximity to the hospital has already affected the worth of our homes? I'd like to see some realtors give comparison. My doctoral training taught me to question research, and I see a lot of holes in their data. More concerning is the fact that the Planning Commission, who is appointed by City Council, seems to be defending the applicant instead of addressing my concerns. Their job is to be sure projects are in accordance with local ordinances. All of you have been on the City Council long enough to remember the decisions made in the noise ordinance of 2000. You promised to address the problems associated with increased helicopter traffic at the hospital. It has happened. Remember who you serve and delay this project. Request a legitimate study instead of this myopic attempt. No mitigation needed? You have to be kidding. I would love to see a study that actually has some data in it that is affecting our lives here. Now, I'm a veterinarian. I have an understanding of emergency. I also have an understanding that they've been landing Black Hawks there, my video data log. I understand that it needs to be safe. What I'm asking for is mitigation for the neighborhood. I don't want to know what we're going to mitigate after it happens. It's already bad. It's already been bad. It's on you. That is what Caltrans is telling you, City Council members. This is your responsibility. That's why they're having you do this. I mean, we can make everything altruistic and, you know, we all want everybody to be healthy. Why did they just shut down the pediatric ICU?
Thank you, Dr. Martin.
Do those children not have?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, very good. We'll go to the staff, and that's the end of our public speakers, by the way. And staff, do you have any response?
Yes, thanks, Mayor Adam. There has been some inconsistency in the numbers we provided for the number of trips that helicopter trips to the hospital, and partially that's that number. It's because that number is very dynamic. It only occurs when there's a trauma victim being transported to the hospital. The latest data that we received from the hospital is about 3 to 4 helicopter trips per week. But I could refer that to the hospital staff to respond with more clarity as to what the actual number is. But again, it is a very dynamic number. This is not static. These aren't planned trips. These happen when there's a trauma victim need to be transported. With regard to the noise study, the noise study was prepared to demonstrate the noise that exists from the existing operation. However, again, I just want to make it abundantly clear that the Thousand Oaks Municipal Code exempts noise from emergency activities, which this is considered an emergency activity. This is for a public benefit. This is a life-saving operation, visiting the hospital from contract services of the city, for fire department and by police department, using this facility to potentially save lives. With that, I have no other comment.
Thank you, Mr. Kearns. And before we go to the applicant for any potential rebuttal, are there any questions from my fellow council members?
Mr. Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
This is Claudia here. Thank you. I do have a question. Have we heard complaints from other residents in the neighborhood who are directly in the flight path? I have really not received an email other than maybe one or two.
We have not received any complaint from anyone in the neighborhood. Directly at the administrative hearing, a few people did attend and address the noise at that hearing, but no correspondence was submitted to staff.
When you say a few people, how many?
I believe it was Dr. Martin and a neighbor.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, we will go back to the applicant. You have a chance to rebut if you'd care to.
Good evening again. This is Austin Manning with the Health System. Two comments. One, I'd like to, for the record, indicate that we have been in contact repeatedly with Dr. Martin to address her questions throughout this process. And then secondarily, as to the question of flight numbers, there was some initial confusion caused. The initial numbers provided were specific to an individual carrier. The correct number for all carriers flying into the helipad are 3 to 4 per week, as Mr. Kearns has indicated earlier. And then lastly, as to the questions related to the noise study, I will allow Chris to speak to that.
Good evening, Chris Karikian here again. As far as regarding the comments stating that the Firehawk was not assessed, that is simply not true. The Firehawk was assessed in a noise study. The comment regarding the barriers and the height of the meter, this is why we use the 3D noise modeling software that I mentioned, because it does take into consideration the different elevations and heights of different receivers. And so in that aspect of it, the way the noise bounces off from the ground to the sky, that is shown in the 3D noise model that we utilized. Regarding the noise measurements that we took during the break, we base the data based on other readings that we take that are typical of certain areas. And so based on what we were able to see, the data that we gathered as far as regular operations go, were consistent with environments that exist within that site. The data, as far as using the meter, we use a type 1 calibrated meter, and those meters have been calibrated and then certified. As far as the additional memo that was mentioned, an additional memo was provided to the hearing, not to bring new information, but to provide more clarity on some of the comments that we had received. Thank you.
All right. Does that finish you up?
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, yes, Mayor Pro Tem, go ahead.
I do have another question. Are there 2 other helipads available in Thousand Oaks? One at the East County Sheriff's Station and one in Hidden Valley. Are those the only ones that we have in the East County? I'm just wondering for alternative sites.
I'm aware of the helipad at the East County Sheriff's Station. Obviously, location in Hidden Valley in unincorporated, I'm not sure.
Can you hear me right now?
Yes, yes.
We probably have about 5 heli-spots that are designated for brush firefighting out in Potrero, over by Baxter, over in the Oak Park area, over off of Arbalest. And a lot of times when we run the remote rescues that we're running now, we end up transporting to an ambulance. If it's not a advanced life support call or a trauma call, if it's a basic life support, then they will be flown to one of those remote heli-spots and transferred to an ambulance. So we're only flying advanced life support or trauma type calls in the helicopter to Los Robles. The only place that is designated, and Steve Carroll can chime in because he knows a little bit more about this than me, but we've been discussing it recently because of all the remote rescues, is in Wildwood. Some of the places in Wildwood, it's very steep terrain, And there might be a BLS depending on different criteria. And I don't know exactly what the criteria is. Steve will probably know that we can fly directly from Wildwood only to Los Robles Hospital, not to delay care. So all of our BLS call, I can't say all, but the process is to, if it's a basic life support call, somebody twisted their ankle, nothing life threatening, no chest pain, is to fly them to a remote helispot, and the helicopters do land in Wildwood at undesignated helispots to transfer to an ambulance to be ground transported to Los Robles.
Thank you, Chief.
All right. With that, if there are no further questions, I'm going to close the hearing, and we'll open it up for council discussion and or a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the heliport improvements. I think that it's important for us to differentiate the ongoing issue of helicopters landing anywhere in town and simply upgrading this helispot so that our larger, newer helicopters can perform that duty that they need to perform in the same way we have in the past. To me, I try to separate the ongoing issue of any noise problems in that neighborhood to simply this helicopter, which according to the study, if I remember right, the noise was almost the same. According to the fire chief, it's actually less, but I think it was a slight increase in noise, if I remember reading it right, 2 to 3 decibels above what the current Hueys are. So the need to get people to the hospital in an exigent circumstance using this helicopter, I think is very important. I don't want to not minimize the noise issues, but a life I think would be more important in that respect.
Thank you, Councilmember Engler. Did you make a motion?
Yes, I did.
All right, very good. Any comments to the motion? Councilmember Jones?
Yeah, I would just concur with what Councilman Engler said. I think if just one life is saved by this accommodation of larger Firehawk helicopters that might otherwise be lost, that would certainly expiate or justify any extra noise which might occur. So I heartily agree with the motion.
Thank you, Councilmember Jones.
Mr. Mayor, I too will support the motion, given that there really hasn't been any widespread concern in the neighborhood regarding this. I think that the concern for noise, that the need for medical transportation or airlift transportation for medical reasons outweighs the other concerns at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah, and I'll support the motion as well. I mean, public safety has always got to be our #1 priority, and this is a significant upgrade to public safety, I believe. The noise study said that the noise, there was no significant impact there, and regardless of what it said, our municipal code exempts emergency activities from the noise situation. So this is a great addition to our emergency response system. It expands our response capabilities, and I think it really brings a public benefit. So with that, I will ask for a vote, please.
Councilmember Engler?
Yes.
Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Bill De La Pena?
Yes.
Mayor Adam?
Yes.
And that motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. All right. We are going to have, is this our third hearing, public hearing? Yes, it is. How about that? This is on water and wastewater connection fees. Go right ahead.
Hearing advertised as required by law is open to consider agenda item 8C regarding water and wastewater connection fee adjustments. And Mayor, at this time, we do not have any public speakers.
All right, thank you. And Ms. Johnson will present the situation to us. Good evening.
Good evening, and thank you, Mayor Adam, City Council members. This discussion is for our water and wastewater connection fees public hearing. Joining me on the dais is our Public Works Director, Cliff Finley. Here's a summary of the proposed water and wastewater connection fee adjustments. What you see here is a 4.5% decrease to the water connection fee, a 0.1% decrease to water surcharge fees, and a 5.2% increase to the wastewater connection fee. The connection fee study, which provided the framework for the proposed connection fees, was approved 2 weeks ago on October 13th. So tonight we have our public hearing for connection fees along with the annual surcharge fee adjustments, which would go into effect January 1st of 2021. The proposed water connection fee is a $385 decrease per equivalent meter unit. So this means that a new single-family residential connection with a 3/4 or 5/8 by 3/4 meter would pay $8,215. Other water fee modifications include our annual fire flow surcharge fees, which are adjusted annually to reflect changes in the construction cost index. This amount is collected whenever a water connection requires a change attributable to additional fire protection water flow requirements, which are set forth by the Ventura County Fire Department. This year's annual adjustment is a 0.1% decrease. Another proposed adjustment due to the annual change in the construction cost index is for the special facility surcharge fees. Currently, there are 3 special facility surcharges, all of which are imposed upon new connections in certain water reservoir zones. These are the Kelly Ventu, Wilder Grissom, and Rolling Oaks service zones, and are being collected to recover early construction costs that the city incurred to expand the water system or water storage capacity requirements to serve private developments. For the Kelly Ventu and Wilder Grissom zones, the proposed adjustment is also a decrease of a 0.1%. For the Rolling Oaks reservoir zone, the anticipated revenue for the city's construction costs in this zone has been collected, and no further collection amounts are proposed. Moving on to wastewater. The proposed wastewater connection fee is a $442 increase per equivalent residential unit. This means that a new single-family residential connection would pay $8,897. As a reminder, this increase is due to asset valuation attributable to numerous maintenance and rehabilitation projects which have occurred in recent years. So in conclusion, adjustment to these fees ensures that new customers pay their fair share for connecting to the water and wastewater systems, and that existing customers are not negatively impacted by any new connections. Staff recommends that Council conducts tonight's public hearing and adopt the water and wastewater fee ordinances, which are included with this staff report. Staff is available if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Questions? Council? All right, I'm not hearing any. So the net effect of this, when you take into consideration the decrease in the water fee and the increase in the wastewater fee, is about $57, which is less than 1% increase. I wish my cable bill would go up by that little. So pretty good deal, I think. If there aren't any further questions or discussion, may I get a motion, please?
Madam or Mr. Mayor, yeah. I move approval of the ordinance.
All right, thank you. And like a vote, please.
Councilmember Engler?
Yes.
Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Bill De La Pena?
Yes.
Mayor Adam?
And that's a yes for me.
And that motion carries 4-0, and I have 2 ordinance titles to read into the record. Ordinance adjusting and setting rates and fees of City Water Division uncodified, and ordinance adjusting and setting rates, fees, and discharge limits of City Wastewater Division uncodified.
Thank you. All right, let us jump to council issues and recommendations.
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, yes, Mr. Jones, go right ahead.
I know this is not part of the agenda, but...
Don't spoil it, Mr. Jones. Maybe others haven't seen it yet.
I didn't see it. I just heard the result.
Okay.
The Dodgers just won the World Series.
How about that? Go Dodgers. All righty, very good. Let us go to council issues and recommendations. And Mr. Giles is going to lead that one.
And since this involves city attorney and myself, we'll do what's customary, which is step off the dais for the discussion.
Understood.
Mayor, members of the council, tonight you're going to be considering the Fourth Amendment to the Employment Agreement of the City Manager, Andrew Powers, and the Seventh Amendment to the Employment Agreement of the City Attorney, Tracy Noonan. These are council items 12A and 12B. For simplicity's sake, if it's all right with the council, we can take those items up together. They will require separate action, though. The City Council reviews the City Attorney and City Manager's performance on an annual basis pursuant to their contract. The performance review for these two employees that report to the City Council for fiscal year 1920 was completed by the City Council on August 25th of this year. The City Manager and City Attorney both requested a deferral of any salary adjustment this year due to the pandemic response the city has been facing. However, the council authorized the mayor to negotiate a one-time allocation of leave in recognitions of the efforts of the city manager and city attorney to achieve council goals over the prior year. The amendments to adopt the negotiated 30-hour leave allocation are presented for your approval. Again, these are two separate items, and you will need to take up the items and take action on them separately, and I am available to answer any questions that you may have. Also, please note that in your supplemental packet there was a revised agreement for the city attorney to recognize a language change that was done in a prior amendment to the contract.
Thank you, Mr. Giles. Questions for Mr. Giles?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I don't have any questions for Mr. Giles. I did review the contracts, of course, and having discussed this as well with council colleagues as agendized, I feel very confident in the performance of both the city attorney as well as the city manager, and it is to be commended that they are foregoing a salary increase given the economic downturn and the pandemic. So I really appreciate that, and I would move approval of the renewal of their contracts.
All right, thank you. Did I hear you say we had to do one at a time, Mr. Giles?
We can do both of them together, I believe. Right?
I believe that they are required to take action separately.
Separately.
Because they are in separate items.
All right. Can you give us one and then the other, please, Mayor Pro Tem?
We can move with the city manager first, followed by the city attorney.
All right. Let's vote on the city manager.
Councilmember Engler?
Yes.
Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Bill De La Pena?
Yes.
Mayor Adam?
Yes.
And that motion carries 4-0.
Second motion.
And the second motion is to approve the agreement with the city attorney.
Vote, please.
Councilmember Engler?
Yes.
Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Bill De La Pena?
Yes.
Mayor Adam?
And that's a yes for me.
Motion carries 4-0.
Very good. Thank you. All right. City Manager, Mr. Powers, follow-up items?
Thank you, Mayor Adam. Just a reminder that our next regular City Council meeting will be on the 10th of November. Right now, we have a department report for our budget calendar and our financial update for last fiscal year end, along with an emergency orders update. And those are the only items we have at this point.
All right. Thank you very much. And I believe we have a closed session this evening.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We do have one closed session tonight. That's conference with legal counsel for existing litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9A on the case Thomas Graybill versus City of Thousand Oaks. It is unlikely I'll have anything to report.
Thank you, Ms. Noonan. All right, that's bringing us to the end of our meeting this evening. And we are going to adjourn this meeting and honor the victims of the Borderline shooting, which it's hard to believe was 2 years ago now. Our community was devastated by this senseless tragedy at the Borderline Bar and Grill on November 7th, 2018. Lives were senselessly taken, leaving families and loved ones, and all of us for that matter, absolutely heartbroken. No anniversary is more terrible than one that recalls beautiful lives tragically lost, and tonight we remember our heroes and celebrate their life. And let me read their names. Sean Adler, Cody Kaufman, Blake Dingman, Jake Dunham, Sergeant Ron Helis, Elena Housley, Danielle Manrique, Justin Allen Meek, Mark Meza Jr., Christina Morissette, Telemarcus Orfanos, and Noel Sparks. This year, in memory of those taken from us and in honor of those who survived, a campaign has been designed to encourage the community to perform 12 acts of kindness. An act of kindness can be simple and bestowed upon people who are closest to you, a stranger, an organization, or perhaps you can perform an act of kindness for yourself. The goal of this campaign is to raise awareness about how many simple acts of kindness are possible and to help the healing process for our community. The 12 Acts of Kindness campaign will run from November 1st through November 30th, and you can learn more about it at toaks.org/12acts. We commit to ensuring the lives of these 12 individuals continue to inspire us, and they will live on in our hearts forever. Thank you for being with us this evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to my fellow council members, and we will reconvene on November 10th. This meeting is adjourned.